The darkness over the Anzio beachhead on that February night in 1944 would become a turning point that German intelligence officers would puzzle over for the rest of the conflict, though they never quite grasped what had truly happened to their bomber crews. 2 complete radar installations had been frantically positioned and buried up to their trailer tops in the Italian soil during a single desperate night. And when the next evening arrived, a dozen aircraft from the Reich's Air Force entered the airspace above the Allied beachhead, only to discover that 7 of them would never return home. The mathematics behind this slaughter defied every principle of aerial combat that military theorists had established over the previous decades of warfare. Think about those numbers for a moment. 7 bombers eliminated from a formation of 12 during complete nighttime conditions, resulting in a destruction rate exceeding 58%. Before this particular engagement, even under ideal daylight circumstances with perfect visibility, anti-aircraft batteries typically achieved a single confirmed kill only after expending approximately 2,500 shells into the sky. The crews who managed to survive and return to their bases described something they had never encountered in all their combat experience. They spoke of anti-aircraft bursts that somehow followed their evasive maneuvers, explosions materializing precisely where their aircraft would be several seconds into the future, defensive fire that appeared to anticipate their tactical decisions before they had consciously made them. What brought down those German aircraft that night wasn't the result of exceptionally talented gunners or fortunate circumstances. The destruction came from a piece of technology called the SCR-584, an automated tracking system using microwave radar frequencies that would fundamentally transform how nations defended themselves against aerial attack. This revolutionary equipment would remain essentially invisible to German forces throughout the remainder of the war, even while it methodically dismantled the Luftwaffe's ability to conduct effective operations. Those German aviators had unknowingly flown directly into warfare's future, and their command structure never fully comprehended what had transpired. The seeds of the Luftwaffe's technological crisis had actually been planted years earlier, back in 1940. When British scientists made the remarkable decision to share their cavity magnetron technology with the Americans through what became known as the TIZAD mission. Those British researchers arrived carrying their most closely guarded invention, the 10-centimetre cavity magnetron, which was absolutely essential for creating the kind of powerful radar systems that both nations desperately needed. This singular act of technological cooperation between allies would produce consequences that neither Britain nor America fully anticipated at the time. While German radar engineers continued advancing along traditional pathways using meter-wave technology that had served them adequately thus far, American engineers working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory were developing something that would prove to be genuinely revolutionary in nature. The SCR-584 system represented a genuine marvel of wartime engineering, possessing the capability to detect incoming aircraft at distances reaching 40 miles and achieving range accuracy down to approximately 75 feet. The system operated using microwave frequencies that German detection equipment had absolutely no ability to perceive or recognize. German radar technology remained completely blind to these particular emissions because the system functioned at frequencies between 27–12900 MHz, corresponding to wavelengths of 10 to 11 centimeters, transmitting pulses of 300 kilowatts lasting 0.8 of a microsecond, with pulse repetition occurring at 1707 pulses every second. The radar warning receivers that German aircraft carried, which had been specifically designed to detect British radar systems operating between 200 and 600 MHz, possessed absolutely no capacity to recognize these microwave emissions. The technological disparity extended far beyond simple differences in operating frequencies. The SCR-584 employed automated tracking through a technique called conical scanning, where the radar beam rotated around its central axis, creating a cone-shaped detection pattern that could lock onto and continuously follow moving targets without requiring any human intervention whatsoever. When engineers integrated this system with the M9 gun director, an analog computing device containing 160 vacuum tubes, the combined system could calculate firing solutions 30 times every second, taking into account wind speed, atmospheric density, target velocity, and gravitational effects on the shells. The deployment of these systems at the Anzio beachhead marked a genuine watershed moment in the history of anti-aircraft warfare. Air attacks against the Allied position simply stopped for an entire week following that first devastating night. Eventually, a single reconnaissance aircraft appeared to probe the defences, only to be immediately destroyed. 10 additional systems were rushed into position during that week, and collectively they eliminated the aerial threat to Anzio entirely. German bomber crews, who had successfully attacked Allied positions throughout Europe for years, suddenly confronted something they had absolutely no framework for understanding. The system's remarkable effectiveness stemmed from its complete automation of the entire engagement process. Once the SCR-584 operator acquired a target and switched the system into automatic tracking mode, the radar established its lock on the aircraft and maintained that lock regardless of whatever evasive maneuvers the pilot attempted. The tracking data fed directly into the M9 director, which computed the future position where the shell and aircraft trajectories would intersect. 4 90mm guns, electronically slaved to the director's calculations, moved in perfect synchronization with each other. German crews reported a phenomenon that completely contradicted their understanding of anti-aircraft warfare: flak bursts that somehow anticipated their evasive maneuvers. When they dove toward the ground, shells exploded at the precise altitude where they would be when the dive bottomed out. When they initiated turns, explosions appeared along their future flight path. This wasn't the familiar barrage fire they had trained to penetrate, with shells saturating an area of sky in hopes that aircraft would fly through them. This was precision shooting executed by machines that calculated faster than human reflexes could possibly respond. While German scientists painstakingly hand-built radar sets in small workshops, treating each unit as essentially a custom creation, American industry mass-produced the SCR-584 with the same efficiency techniques that had revolutionized automobile manufacturing. Approximately 1,700 of these systems were manufactured to provide comprehensive defense against aerial attacks. The primary manufacturer, Chrysler Corporation, applied assembly line techniques that transformed radar production from a craft-based manufacturing process into a true industrial operation. By the end of August in 1943, 610 systems had already been shipped from the factories. The Dodge division of Chrysler delivered system number 1470 on January 28, 1944, with an additional 628 sets being allocated to the United States Marine Corps, coastal defense installations, and spare parts inventory, bringing the total production to 2,098 units. This output from a single American corporation exceeded the entire radar production of Germany throughout the entire war. The contrast revealed fundamental differences in industrial philosophy between the two nations. German Würzburg radar sets required skilled technicians for their assembly, with each individual unit possessing slight variations from every other unit produced. The SCR-584 utilized completely interchangeable parts and modular construction principles, allowing rapid field repairs to be performed by soldiers who had received only basic training. Where Germany built dozens of units, America built thousands. The massive invasion on June 6, 1944 included 39 of these systems, which successfully thwarted Luftwaffe attacks against the beaches throughout the crucial landing phase. These radar units had been specially waterproofed for the amphibious assault, creating an unprecedented defensive umbrella over what would become history's largest invasion fleet. Colonel Joseph Priller, who was one of only 2 Luftwaffe pilots who actually attacked the invasion beaches on that historic day, survived the war to provide debriefing to Allied intelligence officers. He described anti-aircraft fire completely unlike anything he had encountered during 5 years of combat operations. The fire wasn't arranged in the familiar barrage patterns, but consisted of aimed shots that forced constant evasive maneuvering, making accurate attacks essentially impossible to execute. The Luftwaffe's comprehensive failure at Normandy wasn't the result of any lack of courage or flying skill among German pilots. German aviators flew directly into a technological trap they possessed no ability to understand and no equipment to counter. The few who managed to survive reported the identical phenomenon that had been witnessed at Anzio months earlier: anti-aircraft fire that appeared to read their intentions, predicting maneuvers before the pilots themselves had executed them. The defense against the Führer's vengeance weapons, the V-1 flying bombs, provided perhaps the clearest demonstration of the SCR-584's revolutionary capabilities. The flying bombs travelled at 400 miles per hour in straight lines at constant altitude, characteristics that theoretically should have made them ideal targets for anti-aircraft guns. Yet their speed made them nearly impossible to hit using conventional aiming methods that relied on human calculation and manual gun laying. 20 of these radar systems were assigned to England's Channel coast with the specific mission of reducing the number of V-1 flying bombs that reached London. The 80 guns integrated with these systems, firing newly developed proximity-fused shells, destroyed hundreds of the incoming weapons. On one remarkable Sunday, 97 out of 101 flying bombs were shot from the sky. The statistics documented a genuine revolution in anti-aircraft effectiveness that military historians would study for decades afterward. During the first week these systems operated on the coast, they destroyed 17% of incoming V-1 weapons. This rate climbed to 60% by August 23rd and reached 74% during the final week of that month, when on one extraordinary day, 82% of all incoming flying bombs were successfully intercepted. The ammunition expenditure rate improved from 1 V-1 destroyed for every 2,500 shells fired to 1 destroyed for every 100 shells. This 25-fold improvement in ammunition efficiency represented far more than incremental progress in existing technology. It marked the historical point where defensive weapons achieved clear superiority over attacking aircraft for the first time in warfare. German observers stationed on the French coast reported witnessing V-1 weapons being destroyed with short, precise bursts of 3 or 4 shells, a sight that contradicted everything they understood about anti-aircraft warfare based on years of combat experience. The German failure to properly identify the SCR-584 as a significant threat stemmed from a fundamental scientific miscalculation made at the highest levels of their research establishment. In January of 1943, German radar experts, led by Professor Abraham Esau, convinced the High Command that centimeter-wave radar was physically impossible to create. They presented theoretical arguments claiming that insufficient energy would return to receivers operating at such high frequencies to be useful for target detection. Based on this flawed theoretical analysis, Germany terminated all research into microwave radar technology. When German forces managed to capture a British H-2S radar system in February 1943 and discovered it operated on centimetre wavelengths, the revelation came far too late to alter Germany's technological trajectory. Germany had already fallen years behind in microwave technology development, creating a gap that proved absolutely impossible to close during wartime conditions. German intelligence consistently misinterpreted the mounting evidence of Allied radar superiority that came from multiple sources. Pilot reports describing impossible anti-aircraft accuracy were attributed to improved training programs, better optical sights, or simply greater numbers of guns concentrated in defensive positions. The possibility that Americans had achieved automatic radar tracking at microwave frequencies remained beyond German conception until late 1944, when captured equipment finally revealed the truth. Throughout the year 1944, Luftwaffe electronic warfare units operated with equipment that had been designed for an earlier phase of the conflict. The Fuji 227 Flensburg detector searched for emissions between 170 and 220 MHz, completely missing the microwave frequencies that Allied radar systems employed. German pilots flew missions with detection equipment that provided no warning whatsoever of the radar systems that were tracking them, maintaining continuous lock on individual targets and producing emission patterns that German equipment didn't recognize as threatening in any way. Luftwaffe crews flew directly into radar-guided death traps while their warning receivers remained completely silent, providing no indication of the mortal danger they faced. The complete system that Chrysler Corporation produced bore the designation SCR-584 and operated in coordination with a heavy anti-aircraft battery of 4 90mm guns, a British-invented identification friend or foe unit, dedicated power sources, and the M9 gun director. Each individual component represented American engineering superiority in its particular domain. The cavity magnetron generated 300 kilowatts of microwave power, exceeding the output of entire German radar installations. The servo mechanisms that enabled automatic tracking achieved precision levels that German industry proved completely unable to replicate. The M9 director performed ballistic calculations that would have required entire teams of human computers working with mechanical calculators. The integration of these separate technologies into a single unified weapon system represented a conceptual leap that German military thinking simply hadn't achieved during the war years. Designated as the SCR-584 anti-aircraft gun laying system, approximately 1,500 of these integrated systems saw combat use in both the European and Pacific theatres, starting in early 1944. Each system possessed the capability to track aircraft travelling at 600 miles per hour, significantly faster than any operational aircraft of 1944, providing future-proofing that remained effective even when German jet aircraft eventually appeared. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe confronted a crisis of unsustainable attrition that threatened its existence as an effective fighting force. General Adolf Galland reported that Luftflotte Reich had lost 38% of its fighter pilots during April 1944, while Luftflotte 3 had lost 24%. Altogether, the Germans had lost 489 pilots during that single month, including 100 officers, while training centres had forwarded only 396 new pilots to replace them, including just 62 officers. These catastrophic losses weren't solely attributable to air-to-air combat with Allied fighters. Increasingly, experienced pilots fell to anti-aircraft fire that exhibited accuracy levels that seemed impossible based on their understanding of defensive capabilities. Ground attack aircraft, which were absolutely essential for Wehrmacht tactical doctrine, became particularly vulnerable when operating within the SCR-584's optimal tracking envelope of several thousand feet altitude. General Galland, in his post-war memoir, wrote that by 1944, approaching Allied positions meant entering zones where death was mathematically calculated in advance. The guns didn't aim at where aircraft currently were, but at where they would be seconds in the future. There existed no tactical countermeasure against it, no evasive technique that proved effective, only pure luck in whether the shells found you or not. In December 1944, during the Ardennes offensive, German forces finally captured a damaged but essentially complete SCR-584 unit near the town of St. Vith. Dr. Hans Plendl, who was Germany's leading radar expert, personally led the technical examination of the captured equipment. His report to the High Command proved devastating in its implications. The Americans, he wrote, have achieved automatic tracking with accuracy levels we believed were physically impossible. They operate on wavelengths we cannot detect or jam with any existing equipment in our inventory. Most significantly, from a strategic perspective, they mass-produce these systems using industrial techniques while we struggle to build laboratory prototypes one at a time. We are not merely months behind in this technology, we are years behind with absolutely no possibility of catching up under current circumstances. The captured system revealed innovations that German science had previously deemed theoretically impossible to achieve. The automatic tracking maintained its lock despite aggressive target maneuvers. The electronic computation of three-dimensional firing solutions occurred faster than human thought. The seamless integration of radar, computer, and weapons into a single system exceeded anything German engineers had contemplated. But this knowledge arrived far too late to develop effective countermeasures or equivalent systems of their own. The technological helplessness that Luftwaffe pilots experienced contributed directly to the fighter pilots' revolt in January 1945, when leading aces confronted Hermann Göring directly about the impossibility of their operational situation. Leading aces, including Adolf Galland, Johannes Steinhoff, and Günther Lützow, confronted the Reich Marshal directly about conditions that made effective operations impossible. Johannes Steinhoff, who had 176 confirmed victories to his name, told Göring bluntly that they were no longer fighting enemy pilots in traditional aerial combat. They were fighting mathematics calculated by machines, he explained. Individual skill has become completely irrelevant against automation that eliminates human reaction time from the engagement. You blame us for lacking courage, Steinhoff continued. But courage cannot possibly defeat technology we don't possess and cannot counter. These weren't defeatists making these arguments, but Germany's most decorated warriors, men who had proven their courage beyond any possible question. Their recognition that traditional military virtues had become obsolete against automated weapons represented a profound psychological breach in German military culture. Göring's response, which involved relieving Galland of his command and threatening courts-martial against the others, demonstrated the leadership's complete inability to accept technological reality. Even the revolutionary Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter provided no escape from SCR-584 directed fire. The jet's 540 mile-per-hour speed, which made them nearly untouchable by Allied piston engine fighters, meant absolutely nothing to radar systems that had been designed to track targets moving at 640 miles per hour. Lieutenant Colonel Heinz Baer, who became one of Germany's most successful jet pilots, reported after the war that they had initially believed their speed would protect them from anti-aircraft fire. Instead, they discovered the American guns tracked them perfectly regardless of velocity. The shells arrived exactly where the aircraft would be based on trajectory calculations. Speed only meant less time available to execute evasive maneuvers. Several jets were lost to anti-aircraft fire that exhibited accuracy levels they had never previously encountered. The SCR-584's ability to track and successfully engage jet aircraft demonstrated American engineering foresight that German planning entirely lacked. Built to specifications that exceeded any aircraft operational in 1942, the system remained effective against technology that wouldn't appear operationally until late 1944. The production statistics revealed an industrial mismatch that doomed Germany, regardless of whatever tactical innovations their forces might achieve. Chrysler Corporation alone manufactured 2,098 units. Total confirmed production exceeded 1,700 units at minimum, with additional units manufactured by General Electric and Westinghouse. Cost per unit dropped from $50,000 down to under $10,000 through manufacturing improvements. Monthly production rates reached 50 or more units at peak capacity. German production of the Würzburg radar totaled approximately 1,500 units across the entire war. All German radar types combined reached approximately 4,000 units produced, with each unit essentially hand-built by skilled technicians. No significant cost reduction was ever achieved, and production capacity remained severely limited throughout the conflict. This disparity reflected deeper advantages embedded in American industrial culture and manufacturing philosophy. The SCR-584 had been specifically designed for operation by drafted civilians who received only 6 weeks of training before deployment. German radar systems required engineers and technicians with months of specialized education before they could operate the equipment competently. Beyond raw specifications, the SCR-584 demonstrated practical advantages that amplified its combat effectiveness in ways that weren't immediately obvious from technical data. Setup and mobility represented crucial operational advantages. The system became fully operational within 30 minutes of arrival at a new position, compared to hours required for German systems to establish operations. This mobility proved absolutely crucial during Italy's Fluid campaign, where the SCR-584 provided immediate air defense for rapidly advancing forces. Weather independence represented another critical advantage. The system maintained full effectiveness during conditions of complete darkness, heavy rain, dense fog, and thick cloud cover, precisely the weather conditions when conventional defenses became essentially useless. Maintenance requirements remained minimal, with most field repairs completed in under 1 hour using modular component replacement that required no specialized tools or expertise. The combat effectiveness statistics against V-1 flying bombs documented the system's revolutionary capability with mathematical precision. During the first week of operations on the coast, 17% of flying bombs were successfully intercepted. By week 4, the interception rate reached 60%. By week 8, the average interception rate reached 74%. On the best single day, 82% of all incoming flying bombs were destroyed. Ammunition efficiency improved 25-fold compared to conventional methods. These statistics represented the first time in the entire history of warfare that defensive guns achieved consistent superiority over attacking aircraft across sustained operations. The V-1, which was essentially a primitive cruise missile, flew predictable paths that theoretically should have made it an easy target for anti-aircraft gunners. Yet its 400-mile-per-hour speed had rendered it nearly invulnerable to conventional anti-aircraft methods that relied on human calculation and manual gun-laying. The SCR-584 changed that fundamental equation completely. German electronic warfare capabilities, which had proven highly successful against British radar systems early in the war, proved completely ineffective against the SCR-584's microwave operation. The Luftwaffe's sophisticated jamming equipment, operating on meter wavelengths, produced no effect whatsoever on microwave systems. German chaff, called duple and cut to meter wavelengths to create false returns on British radars, proved equally useless against the new technology. The failure extended beyond simple equipment limitations. German electronic warfare doctrine fundamentally assumed that adversaries would employ similar technology operating on similar principles. The possibility that Americans operated radar systems on completely different physical principles remained unconsidered within German military thinking until captured equipment revealed the technological reality. By that point, Germany lacked the industrial resources and time necessary to develop new countermeasures, even if the theoretical knowledge had been available. The SCR-584's influence extended well beyond the aircraft it physically destroyed. By making German reconnaissance flights impossible over Allied-controlled territory, the system effectively blinded Wehrmacht intelligence gathering. German commanders couldn't observe Allied preparations, track troop movements, or identify weak points in defensive lines that might be exploited in offensive operations. This intelligence vacuum contributed directly to German strategic failures throughout the 1944 to 1945 period. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, stated clearly in post-war interviews that they attacked completely blind during the Ardennes offensive. Their reconnaissance aircraft simply couldn't survive over Allied lines long enough to gather useful intelligence. They knew virtually nothing about enemy reserve positions or troop movements. The element of surprise, which was absolutely essential to their entire operational plan, became impossible to achieve when only one side possessed the ability to conduct effective reconnaissance. For Luftwaffe aircrews, the SCR-584 represented something psychologically devastating that went beyond simple fear of death. It represented death delivered by machines that completely eliminated human skill from the combat equation. Pilots who had trained intensively for years survived hundreds of combat missions and earned their nation's highest military decorations, found themselves rendered helpless against automation that made their expertise irrelevant. The testimony of survivors reveals the profound psychological impact this had on German aviators. Captain Heinrich Baer, who ended the war with 220 confirmed victories, stated that fighting enemy pilots represented warfare as they understood it, where skill faced skill and courage faced courage. But the radar-guided guns weren't warfare in any traditional sense, he explained. They were execution by mathematics, cold calculations that determined life and death. There existed no honor whatsoever in dying to a machine's calculations, no validation of the warrior ethic they had embraced. This dehumanization of combat affected morale far more severely than simple fear of death would have. Luftwaffe pilots had fully accepted mortality as an inherent part of their warrior ethic and professional identity. What they fundamentally couldn't accept was irrelevance, the reduction of their hard-won skills and accumulated experience to meaningless factors in an equation they possessed no ability to influence or counter. After Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence officers arranged demonstrations of the SCR-584 for captured Luftwaffe officers, revealing the technology that had opposed them throughout the final year of the war. Their reactions ranged from genuine amazement to bitter recognition of what they had faced. Many expressed profound relief at finally understanding what had been killing their comrades throughout those final desperate months. Dr. Wilhelm Runge, who had worked on German radar development during the war, admitted during a 1985 interview that they had systematically dismissed every field report that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about American technological capabilities. They created elaborate alternative theories to explain impossible anti-aircraft accuracy rather than accept the simple truth that Americans possessed better technology. This institutional arrogance, he acknowledged, cost thousands of German lives unnecessarily. The German military's institutional inability to recognize American technological superiority stemmed from deeper cultural assumptions that had become embedded in their thinking. The Wehrmacht, which had successfully pioneered military innovation throughout the 1930s, simply couldn't conceive that American engineers working in university laboratories could outperform German scientists and engineers. After the war concluded, the radar technology was adapted for use in various systems, including the ANMPQ-12 and ANMPQ-38 systems, and eventually into the United States Army Field Artillery Missile System, specifically the MGM-5 Corporal missile. The fundamental principles established by the SCR-584, particularly automated target prediction and complete systems integration, became foundational concepts for all subsequent air defense systems developed by any nation. Every modern surface-to-air missile system descends conceptually from the SCR-584 in terms of its basic operational principles. The system proved conclusively that truly effective air defense required removing human reaction time from the entire engagement cycle. This lesson, learned through the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe's combat power, shaped military technology development throughout the Cold War period and continues influencing design philosophy to the present day. While complete statistical records remain elusive due to widespread wartime record destruction, the available data clearly demonstrates the SCR-584's devastating combat effectiveness. Confirmed production reached a minimum of 1,700 units manufactured, with Chrysler alone documenting 2,098 units produced. Peak production rates exceeded 50 units monthly. Combat effectiveness at Anzio on the first night of operations saw 7 bombers destroyed from a formation of 12, representing a 58% success rate, percent kill rate that shattered all previous records. Against V1 weapons, peak performance reached an 82% interception rate. Ammunition efficiency improved 25-fold compared to conventional methods. The D-Day invasion included 39 units that provided complete air defense over the landing beaches. Technological advantages were equally impressive when examined in detail. Detection range reached 40 miles, essentially double German capability. Range accuracy reached 75 feet compared to German systems that achieved 500 feet or worse. Tracking was fully automatic compared to German manual tracking that required constant operator attention. Setup time required only 30 minutes compared to German systems requiring 2 hours or more. The German encounter with the SCR-584 offers enduring lessons about the nature of technological surprise in warfare that remain relevant decades later. Convinced of their fundamental superiority, constrained by theoretical assumptions that proved incorrect, and unable to imagine that American innovation could surpass German engineering, German leaders systematically sent their aircrews to face a threat they fundamentally didn't understand and possessed no equipment to counter. General Paul Deichmann summarized the catastrophic failure with remarkable clarity in his post-war writings. They believed what they wanted to believe, he explained. Every single piece of contradictory evidence that emerged from combat operations was systematically explained away through alternative theories. They simply couldn't accept that American engineers had achieved what their own scientists had declared theoretically impossible. By the time German leadership finally faced reality and acknowledged the technological gap, the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force had essentially ceased to exist as a meaningful military factor. The failure wasn't primarily a matter of intelligence-gathering capability, since German observers reported American anti-aircraft effectiveness with reasonable accuracy. The failure was fundamentally one of intelligence interpretation, where accurate field reports were dismissed because they contradicted institutional assumptions about American capabilities and limitations. This cognitive blindness, this institutional refusal to accept uncomfortable facts, proved far more damaging to German military effectiveness than any security breach or intelligence failure could possibly have been. The SCR-584 embodied fundamental American industrial philosophy that emphasized mass production, complete standardization, and operational simplification. Rather than crafting individually perfect units through artisanal methods, American engineers designed specifically for reliable mass manufacture using assembly line techniques. This approach, derived directly from decades of automotive production experience, proved vastly superior to German craft precision for military applications, where quantity and reliability mattered more than individual perfection. The contrast extended deeply into operational philosophy as well. German military culture traditionally emphasized expertise and specialization, requiring highly trained personnel to operate sophisticated equipment. American design philosophy for the SCR-584 emphasized removing human skill from the operational equation wherever possible, making expertise unnecessary for basic operations. This democratization of advanced technology, making it accessible to minimally trained personnel, proved absolutely decisive in conditions of total war where personnel quality inevitably declined as casualties mounted and training time compressed. The SCR-584 fundamentally marked the end of aerial warfare as primarily a contest of human skill, courage, and experience. It initiated the age of automated combat that continues accelerating to the present day. For the Luftwaffe, this technological transition arrived as an essentially incomprehensible shock to their institutional culture and self-conception. They had entered the war as knights of the air, viewing themselves as a warrior elite where individual skill and courage determined outcomes. They ended the war as victims of mathematical calculations executed by machines, where their courage and skill had become completely irrelevant to survival. Johannes Steinhoff, reflecting decades after the war during interviews conducted in the 1970s, provided perhaps the most insightful assessment of what the SCR-584 represented. The system didn't merely shoot down their aircraft, he explained. It shot down their entire conception of what warfare fundamentally was. They had genuinely believed that war was ultimately about courage, individual skill, and strength of will. The Americans proved definitively that modern war was actually about technology, industrial production capacity, and automation that eliminated human factors. They were magnificent warriors, he concluded, who were defeated by superior machines rather than superior men. The SCR-584 radar system stands historically as one of World War II's most genuinely decisive weapons, significant not primarily for the aircraft it physically destroyed, but for what it represented as a technological and philosophical watershed. It demonstrated the triumph of systematic technological superiority over traditional military virtues that had defined warfare for centuries. The Luftwaffe faced an enemy weapons system that effectively couldn't miss because it had eliminated human error from the entire aiming process through automation. German pilots never fully understood what they actually faced during combat operations because their leadership fundamentally couldn't accept its existence without admitting unacceptable truths about German technological inferiority. Field reports describing impossible anti-aircraft accuracy were systematically dismissed as exaggeration by frightened crews. Evidence of automatic tracking capability was institutionally ignored as physically impossible based on German theoretical assumptions. By the time German scientists actually examined captured SCR-584 units and fully understood the technology they revealed, the Luftwaffe had already been reduced to complete combat ineffectiveness. The Germans never truly knew that American radar technology had systematically devastated the Luftwaffe because acknowledging that reality would have required admitting fundamental inferiority in science, industrial capability, and military innovation across multiple domains simultaneously. That psychological barrier proved completely insurmountable until total defeat made continued denial impossible to maintain. For the Luftwaffe air crews who directly faced this technology in combat, the SCR-584 represented death calculated by machines and delivered with mathematical precision, completely immune to human courage or accumulated skill. They flew into an electronic killing field where their individual fate was computed before they even arrived in the engagement zone, where their decisions and reactions meant nothing against pre-calculated firing solutions. The age of the warrior pilot, the ace who dominated through superior skill and fighting spirit, ended definitively in the skies over Europe, destroyed by American radar that tracked invisibly, calculated instantaneously, and killed automatically without human intervention or judgment. The legacy of the SCR-584 extends far beyond its specific wartime service. It established the fundamental template for all modern air defense systems and proved conclusively that in technological warfare, the side that successfully automates the kill chain wins decisively. The Luftwaffe learned this brutal lesson through the systematic destruction of its combat power, aircraft by aircraft, mission by mission, with each loss calculated and delivered by machines that never grew tired, never missed their aim, and never knew mercy or hesitation. The Germans never truly knew, until far too late to matter, that they weren't actually fighting American gunners, but American mathematics, embodied in radar systems that transformed the sky itself into a computed killing zone, where every cubic foot of airspace could become instantly lethal. Their courage, their years of training, their accumulated combat experience, all became irrelevant factors in equations they couldn't see with any equipment, couldn't jam with any countermeasures, and ultimately couldn't survive. In that terrible revelation lay the birth of genuinely modern warfare, where ultimate victory belongs not to the brave or the skillful, but exclusively to the technologically superior.